as a program can be used to lay out any kind of document you want. We tend to default to slides, and that's logical, but it's nothing but a layout tool. And actually, it's way better than Word. Word is a really rigid, inflexible layout program, whereas PowerPoint's fairly fluid. You can put anything anywhere you want inside of PowerPoint. This is a file I downloaded from posterpresentations.com. If you go to I'm not going to have you go there, but if you go to posterpresentations.com, you can choose from all of the templates that they have available. And so I went ahead and downloaded one of those. Now, if you go to posterpresentations.com and you download a template, you're going to get one of their default templates. Those are really boxy and have a lot of columns. Now, of course, you're able to customize those, but my issue with those is they tend to dictate to you what the design should be when the content should be dictating what the design should be. And that's the reason why I think you should work with a blank page. Then you can decide what the content is asking for. So my first instruction, I think, in that sheet says to just choose, when you launch PowerPoint, you may see a panel that gives you a range of template options. Choose the blank template. I think this one will be just the one that says white. And we should end up with this. Then go to File, Page Setup. And here's where you can decide what the size of your poster is going to be. I'm going to go ahead and go with 48 inches wide by 36 inches tall. And it's going to give you this warning. And we'll just say OK. So now our poster is 36 by 48 inches. Next, I want to get rid of everything that's on here. So I'm going to click on each box and hit the delete key. And you should see one vertical guide and one horizontal guide on your page. At this point, the only thing showing up on the page should be one horizontal guide and one vertical guide. Now, if you've used your pencil and paper and you more or less have an idea of what your design is going to be, then at this point, then you're moving your guides to reflect some decisions you've made about that you made when you made your pencil and paper sketch. Like, how is there going to be, for instance, a narrow column on one side, a narrow column on the other side, and a wide column in the middle? Is there going to be 3 equally sized columns? Is there going to be a wide one on the left and a narrow one on the right? So that's why I think it's helpful to already have sketched that out, so you at least have a rough idea of what your design is before you have to start dealing with it on the computer, which is much less flexible. Then you can park your guides where you where you kind of want your units of content to go. Now, the design note that you see on the side says that margins go a long way toward defining the look of your layout. Depending on the amount of content you have, the wider margins you use, the more open the presentation is going to look. It's going to have a lighter, more open look if it's got wider margins. If the content's crowding the edges, or is even kind of starting to intrude on the edges, that may be necessary because the amount of content you have, but that has a less open feel to it than if you have wider margins. Now, these units of measurement up here are in 2-inch increments, and they start from the center. If you zoom up more, then you can see them. And I believe this is where you zoom. If you zoom up more, the increment of rulers will change to be a much more accurate. It'll switch to inches, and then you'll get it into half inches and quarter inches, so on. So your default at this viewpoint is that the rulers are shown at 2-inch increments. Everyone see that? So the way that you move the guides is click on them to move them, and option click on them to create new ones from the existing ones. So if you're wanting to create more, you need to option click on the ones we already have. Option is I believe 2 keys away from your space bar. So hold down Option and then click on one and then move it where you want it to go, and it'll make a new one. So let's say that we want to have our margins be 2 inches wide. Then you would hold down Option and click on a guide and move it so that it's 2 inches from the edge. So now we've created the sort of the outside frame of the design. Now I think my sheet says 1.5 inches. You should use guides to create the header section of the poster, and I'm using terminology that's kind of more related to web design. We always think of a website as having a header, right? And because I don't know that that's necessarily a bad way to think of design these days, because we are so used to looking at websites and we're used to the hierarchy of websites, I don't know that you can't use website logic in designing something that's not a website. You can use it for a poster. So I'm going to say I'm going to create the header section. What's going to be in the header section? Probably the title of your presentation, the author of the presentation, and possibly an MNU logo or some other logo like your association or whatever else you want to have on there, a badge kind of thing. So that's going to need to be a fairly dominant size. So I'm going to go ahead and park this down. I'm going to hold down Option, click on my existing guide, and drop one at 10 inches down from the top. So here's where I've decided that the header section is going to go. And then there's also going to be a footer section, again using a website term. Down here would be where you might put your bibliography or other references that your footnotes, whatever references you want to include. It's probably not going to be this big. It's maybe going to be 2 inches tall. So go ahead and define a section that that's going to go into. So now I've defined where my footer section is going to go. And I guess I'm assuming, before we get too far into all that, let's go ahead and establish columns here. And just for the sake of conversation, let's say that we want to drop one at 12, we want to drop a guide at 12 and another one at 12. And then we'll define some column dividers between them. So I'm going to again hold down Option, drop one at 12 inches. And then I'm going to just define myself a little bit of a column divider between them. So what I'm saying at this point is that this section over here between this line and this line is column number 1. The big area in the middle is column 2, and this area is column 3. So the elements of the design can be broken down into several basic categories: color, type, what kind of typefaces you're going to use, what kind of shapes are you going to use, what kind of images, are you going to use graphs or not. PowerPoint gives you a lot of control over those. So let's talk about color. Now again, one of the basic things to remember is that your information must stand out, yet be easily consumed and not smothered by decoration. So the decisions you make about color should support the information. PowerPoint lets you choose from built-in color themes, which is a good place to start. So there should be a tab on there that says Themes that will run across the top. And if you click on the colors icon, this gives you your built-in color themes. I'm going to go with Expo. And the reason why I like Expo for this is because it's got that range of the color circle. It's pulling from all parts of it. It's got your warm, cool, dark, light. It's going to give me a lot of variety, but not too much variety. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that as my theme by double clicking it. Now whenever I go to pick a color for something, that's going to show up as the default colors available to me since I picked that as a theme. Okay, so for the background, still under the Themes tab, click on the background icon. And then this will open then click on the Format Background element. This gives us the Format Background dialog box. In the Fill category, choose a color from the Color drop-down menu. So when you click on this right here where it says Automatic, then it's going to give us our theme colors. And I'm going to just choose a medium light version of this yellow color and then say Apply, and now I have a background color for my slide. Let's talk about type. Much like color, type should be chosen on the basis of how it supports the meaning's content and not purely as decoration. So again, I've mentioned putting your text into categories and trying to assign values to it. So we're probably assuming that the headline is going to be the thing with the highest value for the sake of at least what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and make a headline on here. I have my guides where I want it to go. So I am going to go to the Home field, and I'm going to go to Insert. If you're looking at the wall, I'm in the Home tab. In the Insert tab, I'm going to choose Text Box. Now here's the thing, is that if you actually put this cursor where you want the box to go, it's going to drag the guide, not draw a text box. So let's draw the text box where we don't want it to go, and then we'll move it to where we want it to go. So we want it to not be on a guide when we draw it. Now we can start typing a headline. Then you can choose your point size. Now, one of the first lessons that I teach in typography class is not to think that 86 point type is big, or don't think 72 is big. Sometimes you think that, well, let's see, this program's, the biggest option is giving me 72, so 72 must just be the biggest type that you can possibly have. Well, this is a large poster, and by the time it gets printed at full size, some of this type might be 600 point, so don't be afraid to choose a high number there. We want it to be as big as it needs to be. Those numbers really don't mean a whole lot. So if I select that text, and you can use Shift Command. Command is the key next to the space bar, and the greater than sign will make it bigger. Or you can just choose the size from the list, but the size on the list ends at 96. But what I urge you to do is to let your headline dominate the design by making it big and graphically strong enough that it's clearly emphasized. Then there's the issue of type color. So if you select the type, again, if you click on the type color icon, our theme colors come up as a default. Maybe I will decide to make my text be red instead of black. Maybe I'll decide to make it a much heavier, weightier typeface. Now if you click on the names of the fonts, then you'll get a font list that shows you what the fonts actually look like. You got fonts like Future or Extra Bold that are very, very weighty and fill up a lot of space, but then you could go maybe with a more condensed version of that font. Condensed Extra Bold lets you make it big, but it also doesn't take up near as much width. But I am interested in making sure that headline has got enough visual impact that it dominates. Now, I did show you an exception to that. One of those designs I showed a while ago, the headline actually wasn't that big. It was that little ribbon effect thing that was happening up here in the corner. Now, that's not big, but it's visually distinctive, which to me is kind of the same thing. So if you're not going to make it large, make sure that it gets a lot of play in some other way. Unless you're using PowerPoint to create an original illustration or infographic, The function of the shapes is to provide structure for your information, so its role should be subordinate to the information. So in the hierarchy of layout, information is more important than structure, and structure is more important than background. PowerPoint gives you a lot of choices. Now, and all graphic programs give you the ability to do things that aren't necessarily advisable to do. And one of these things are all the different shapes and things and doodads that it gives you. You know, all the arrows and weird little shapes and glows and inner glows and make it look like it's on fire and all this other stuff that are all defaults and easy to do. But to me, again, depending on what your tone of your thing is, if it's a fairly academic kind of piece, and I've worked with the nursing professors in the past, and theirs are always kind of medical, right? So we don't want that to look too zany, even though that one had the operation guy on it. But so limits on that. Again, things like lines and connectors, to me the best line you can use is a plain old straight line with no arrows or other doodads on it. Rectangles can be a problem because then you start creating a lot of boxes and things start to be confined in boxes, and that becomes a problem. You're welcome. So basic shapes, the things that it calls basic shapes, to me are not really very useful. To create a rectangle, go to the Format tab and click on the shape icon. Let's see here, the shape icon. There we go. It's right here. And the tooltip says insert a shape. Click on that. You got your rectangles. Let's choose a rectangle. And I'm just simply going to draw a rectangle. Now it's giving me by default a gradient fill. The rectangle may show up with a default format of a gradient. This can be changed by clicking on the Format Shape Styles section. I recommend that you choose a style with a solid color that has little contrast with the previously chosen background and no outline. So for instance, if I choose that right there, I get a shape that doesn't contrast all that much with the background. Here's another thing that you might find helpful, and I probably should end with this. Let's say that you want to start designing, but you don't have exactly the text that you want to use, but you kind of want to play around with the design with just some sort of text, plain text in it. There's a website, and if you Google Lorem, L-O-R-E-M, Ipsum, then you get a Lorem Ipsum website, and you can kind of scroll down and just highlight a whole bunch of Lorem Ipsum text and copy it, and then go back to your PowerPoint and paste it in, and then start to work with the format of it. So as you're playing around with this, helpful to use the Lorem Ipsum text. Now this is 20-point text right here. And that seems like pretty big text, but it's like tiny in the scheme of this entire design. So your text is probably going to be more like 30 or 36 points if it's going to be readable from a distance. Again, I urge you to print your stuff out and look at it from a distance. And I guess I'll end with, if you ever want to talk with me about your designs, just email me, BB Merriman, and attach your file to your email. And you know, if you want to just have me take a look at it and see if I can offer any advice, I'd be more than happy to do that. That's it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.